In this lecture, Cogs in the Machine, we're going to look at today's Japan from the viewpoint of the ordinary workers and managers. In this part of the lecture, we're going to look at the 1990s lost decade and the reform of the 21st century in the 2000s. In the last decade, Japan goes through a long period of stagnant economic growth, and many businesses went bad. Many, for example, here are some amusement parks. They're built all over the country during the bubble times, and then when the economy came crashing, these parks became abandoned, and now you can go there and see these very ghostly abandoned amusement parks across Japan. By 1992, Japan had slid into a long recession of stagnant economic growth when the speculative land bubble burst. You can see the setting is that in the 1980s Japan was wealthy, just so much money there. So people began to speculate on land, buying land, using then that land as collateral to borrow more land, and land was just getting too expensive. It was too speculative. Okay, and this was a time when people were flush with money. And this is a nightclub called Juliana's Tokyo. And this is, in Japan, seen as the symbol of the excess of the bubble years. Okay, you see all these women dancing on stage? Those are actually office ladies. And they know, office ladies, that's right, they're up on there. They know they're not going to get promoted. So they figure, okay, I got a nice body. I might as well flaunt it. I'm not going to get promoted anyway, why not just go up and dance? And so these office ladies would dress at night into these go-go dancer outfits and jump on stage and just dance there like amateur go-go dancers. And meanwhile, salary men would come just to gawk, just to stay there and drink. And this was seen as the ultimate, in excess. But then all this came to a crash in 1992 when this speculative land bubble burst. And many companies which had bought a lot of land using, loans, now find the land's not worth as much and they cannot repay their loans. Okay, companies make bad investments. Banks, meanwhile, they lent money to these unprofitable companies, and now they start lending them even more money, because the banks say these companies are too big to fail. We can't let them fail and start laying off people, and so, the government also gives the banks a nudge to keep lending. So the banks kept lending money. And, in Japan, just, a lot of people lost so much money, it entered a deflationary cycle. Prices started shooting down. Okay, and this deflationary cycle has not stopped as of 2011. Prices are still going down. So for Hawaii business people, a key point is, remember, Japanese today are not flush with money. And even if they want money, they want value. And don't think everything's expensive in Japan. There are some really cheap places. In fact, it's possible to eat cheaper in Japan than Hawaii if you know where to eat. Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi, who ruled as Prime Minister from 2000 to 2006, when he came to power, he said, I'm going to change Japanese society. And economic reforms were made under his watch. For example, the government made laws to encourage the temporary worker system, known as the Haken system. Okay, that way companies now found it easier to hire Haken temporary workers, and these workers were useful because the companies didn't have to give them benefits, and they could be fired when their contract was over. And also, to some extent, the banks did get rid of some of their bad loans. They started demanding repayment from companies that, owed them a lot of money, saying, look, we would love to give you more money, but we can't. You'd better pay us back. So to some extent, some of the loans, bad loans, were gotten rid of. Also, the Japanese government made laws that made it much easier for foreign companies and foreign goods to enter the Japanese market. In fact, it became easier for foreign companies to buy Japanese companies. And then we started seeing, a lot more imported rice come in, okay, lowering the cost of living for many Japanese, because the rice produced in Japan was just way too expensive. And so actually, Japan actually went into a long period of economic growth, actually, from 2000 to 2008. In 2008, this economic growth came to a halt when the worldwide recession hit. Companies also began to change in Japan, downsizing and also outsourcing a lot of their production overseas. For example, companies like Toyota, Toshiba, and Sony and other corporations now have a large share of the production facilities outside of Japan, especially in China. For example, look at this map. This is Toyota's map. As you can see, Toyota in the year 2010 had 66 plants and manufacturing companies. 15, that's 15, were in Japan, and get this, 51 were overseas. So as you can see, Japanese companies started building their factories and plants outside of Japan in order to stay profitable. And also within companies, there was a lot of change. For example, instead of just promoting people, depending on their age, there was now merit pay. And people got promoted due to ability. So a lot of younger people now were put in charge of older people if they showed promise and ability. So realize then that the old, economic model, the post-war model is gone, okay? The elements are still there, but it's been, changed a lot. And one of the big, for example, changes was that one of the costs of the recovery in, 2000 was the growth of a gap between rich and poor in Japan. Okay, now during the high-speed growth era, the wealth was relatively equally distributed. 90% of Japanese saw themselves as middle class. Whether that was true or not, I don't know, but the Japanese at least believed that they all were middle class. However, the recovery did not, spread out in Japan equally. It was mainly in places like Tokyo, while outside Tokyo, the economic recovery was not as strong, especially in rural areas. Also, there was a growing gap between rich and poor, and now Japan actually has more social inequality than Germany or France. Okay, Japan's gap between rich and poor is still less than the United States or Great Britain, but it is now more than Germany or France. And with the recovery from 2000 to 2008, we started seeing ultra chic shopping complexes spring up in Tokyo for the very wealthy. For example, this is Roppongi Hills. Okay, this Roppongi Hills was the symbol of this new rich-poor divide. It's a really fancy shopping center. All the stores are European stores, and there are tons of apartments in this complex. Some of these apartments are $50,000 a month to live there. You got to be that rich to go. Like escalators and glass domes. You have a museum with all kind of masterworks and luxury stores from like Milan and Paris. It's really, really glitzy for the very rich. And in Japan, there's a lot of hidden poor. The people who are, in need often are really reluctant to ask for help, and they're very ashamed that they need to ask for help, so they often hide. For example, this year you'll see this Japan all over. This is a train station, and at night you'll start seeing these cardboard boxes pop up, and you're wondering, what's these boxes? And if you look inside, which you shouldn't do, there's actually homeless people living in these boxes. Many times these boxes are covered with nets, or it's hot, but they cover it because they don't want you to look inside. They're so ashamed that they actually hide in these boxes, okay, at nighttime when, the trains are not running, and they sleep there. The daytime comes, they fold the boxes up and go away. Okay, so it's really shameful to be poor in Japan. Well, the Japanese government, just finally released the poverty rate statistics, and it was shocking when it's discovered in the year 2007, Japan's poverty rate, okay, which is $22,000 a year for a family of four. Okay, that's the poverty rate, was 15.7%, 15.7%. Wow, $22,000 a year, family of four. In the U.S., the poverty rate is 17.1%. So it's still slightly less than America, but not much. Okay, and economists think this poverty rate probably had doubled since the 1990s recession. Okay, and the poverty is mainly in the countryside, in places like Hokkaido. Okay, where you can't really see because the mass media doesn't really cover it. But we know now, some families already are reaching out for welfare. There are about 1 million households on welfare, which is about 2% of all households in Japan. So again, they don't have like a well-developed welfare system. The idea is, you want to, get money, we ain't going to give it to you. You better work. Well, finally some households are desperate enough that, they're actually applying and trying to get welfare. Now, poor people, where do they stay? Many of them, like single men, will go to bunk beds for $14 a night, or some of them will actually go to 24-hour cyber cafes and just stay there because it's cheaper. Act like you're using the internet when you're actually just sleeping, in the booth. And so there is now people realizing a lot of hidden poor in Japan. In part 2, we're going to look at the salarymen. Now there are less and less salarymen openings in Japanese companies. Yet these are the people, the lucky ones you could call them, who have jobs guaranteed for life. In exchange, they have to work really, really hard for the company. To make it in the business world, education is the key to success. In fact, it's the only key to success. The only people who can get by without education are factory workers, athletes, or entertainers. If you want to make it in Japanese business, you must get an education. There's only one path to become a salaryman or salarywoman at a top company. That is to get into a good school like the University of Tokyo. The University of Tokyo is like the Harvard, Stanford, and MIT of Japan all rolled into one. So the lesson that Japanese learn early on is membership in a prestigious organization is important. It's not one's skills or what you can do, it's what group you belong to. Probably the best way to really understand this is when you talk to college students in America, you ask them, well, what do you want to be? A lot of them will go, well, I want to be an engineer. I want to be an accountant. I want to be a manager. That's what American students would say. The Japanese students would say, I want to work for Toyota. I want to work for Panasonic. I want to work for Sony. You see that? It's more defined in what group you hope to join. So you can see Japanese society, places strong emphasis on hierarchy, consensus, being able to join a group. So what this does is this discourages entrepreneurial spirit. It discourages entrepreneurs and free thinkers, and a lot of this is needed for modern capitalism. So, people like, Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, if they were born and raised in Japan, I bet you right now they'll be, panhandling for, money somewhere in Tokyo because they never would have made it in Japan. You want to go to a good company and work good company? Well, to do so, go to an elite university. Because in Japan, the top ranked companies usually recruit only from prestige universities. Okay, and prestige universities are schools like the University of Tokyo, which is probably the top school in Japan, it's a public school. Kyoto University, Osaka University, or Keio University, which is a private school. Now, I want to tell you, probably 95% of you who are listening to this lecture would probably not get into any of these schools, and that includes me. Why? Because the exams are incredibly difficult. How difficult are they? They stress rote memorization, not critical thinking. It's how much knowledge you can just call upon if I ask you trivial questions. Okay, think of it as like Jeopardy on steroids, or playing Trivial Pursuit or games like that you got to know lots of trivia. And the only way to get ready for these exams is to just study and just memorize tons of facts. And so you need years of study. It is said that to get into the University of Tokyo, if you sleep more than 4 hours a day, you will not get in because you just got to study like crazy. Okay, so these exams are grueling beyond belief. Now, let's say you don't get into the school of your choice from the exams. Then what some people do is they become ronin. Okay, ronin means masterless samurai. Okay, samurai without a master. And so what they do is these students will, if they fail the exam, they'll take a year off, and during that 1 year, just study intensely, and then try again for the exams and hope to get in. Now, if one does get into university, it is unbelievable 4 years of doing nothing. Okay, professors don't take attendance. Okay, their work is really Mickey Mouse. You can cut class and still pass. Why? Because it's supposed to be a time where students relax. They let off steam. They work part-time jobs. They hang out with their friends, drink with them. It's supposed to be your reward for getting in to the top universities. Japanese must start studying in childhood if they're aiming to become a salaryman or salarywoman at a top-ranked company. Okay, because you want to, think of it this way. You want to get into a good university. To get to a good university, you need to get into a good high school that preps people for the exam. But these, high schools are extremely competitive to get into. So to get into a good high school, that means you have to get into a good junior high school. And then, you're then seeing then to get to good junior high school, one has to get to a good elementary school. And so in a lot of these, students then, to get, into these good schools will often go to cram schools. After the school finish, you get extra training. And sometimes they finish, studying at like 9 or 10 at night. It's, that intense and that grueling. But the payoff is, for example, look at the picture of this guy on the right. He just found out, see all these numbers and letters up on the piece of paper behind him? Those are the numbers of the test takers who just got in. And he just got in to the University of Tokyo. Now he knows he is set for life. At age 18, his future has been decided. He just got in. Now, these, one thing good you could say about the education system is it doesn't require connections to get into a good public school. It's purely how well you do in a test. Nothing else. Nothing else. And he just found out he got in. Doesn't matter if he's rich or poor. He got in, and he knows now that he's probably going to go 4 years in University of Tokyo. Then he's going to enter the bureaucracy or a top company, and he is set for life. He has just joined the Japanese elite. So what they do is they celebrate is the football team grabs him and throws him in the air to celebrate. And, you see this happening. Probably the guy in front of him didn't get in. You see that guy in the head, and he looks really sad. So you see that. They're thrown up. It's called a doage, which means, they throw you up in the air and you celebrate. So let's say you get into a really good college. Okay, so you party, and then you realize your senior year, you have to start looking for a job. In fact, you must do it because in Japan, people, job hunt on a set schedule. One has to join a company within a few years after graduation. There's no time off. Companies don't like to hire older people. So if you want to join a top company as a new recruit, you'd better do so by the time you're 25. Okay, if not, companies won't even touch you. I don't care if you went to the University of Tokyo or to Osaka University. If you're over 25 and you've taken too much time off after graduation, they're not going to touch you. They're going to figure you're not going to obey. You're too old, and so it's a lot of pressure then to find a job. Okay. After you graduate at age 22. Okay, it's a really intense time. But what makes things bad now is companies these days are hiring fewer new young people. Why? Because they promised the older ones, remember, we're going to give you lifetime employment. So that means in the companies, in order to protect the jobs of older people, are hiring more temp workers and hiring far fewer new salarymen or salary women. So now that means the young people have to compete really hard to get a job. And if they don't get it by 25, I don't care what school you went to, all that studying will be for nothing because no company will want to hire you. And so new recruits, let's say one does enter a company, well, they enter the company on April 1, okay, all throughout the nation. Okay, it's all done that way, and they undergo intense socialization. Okay, and for example, they enter in the new shashiki, which is the entering the company ceremony, and one is welcome to the company. Some of these are small if the company is small, but some of these are massive if the company is huge. Okay, and you start learning the company culture. For example, look on the right. This is actually a shoe shining new shashiki. That's really interesting. Okay, it's a shoe company, and what happens is all the new recruits come in, and at first the older senior employees will shine your shoes. Your boss will shine for you, and they'll explain to you while they're shining how one has to shine shoes properly. Okay, once then they shine new employee shoes, the roles reverse, and the bosses and managers step up there, and the new employees shine their shoes. You can see that. So in a way, it's like saying welcome to the company. Now, once one enters a company, they're given a humongously thick guidebook. Often we're talking 70 plus pages on how the company works, how to dress, how to sit, how to bow, how to exchange name cards. Okay, because many college students don't know how to use proper speech. They don't know these. It's not really taught really in the in schools or in college. Instead, the training is done that first year, and each new employee usually has a senior employee to follow them around and show them the ropes and to teach them the correct behavior and the proper company protocol. And these senior employees and managers, they will criticize associates saying like, "You idiot, what did you just do? Do you understand?" They would like be really demanding, and we're talking super perfectionist. Okay, and many new employees are reduced to tears because the training is just so intense. Okay, they're yelled at all the time. Okay, so think of it like army boot camp. But what managers are doing is they're just, copying the way they were treated when they were new to the company. And the idea is if you don't, toughen the new employee now, they're going to fall apart when they meet the demands of real work. And so they try to be as mean to them as possible just to get them, tough and used to company life. And managers will, the kind-hearted ones will often take the subordinates out for a drink after work. And over drinks, when, you don't have to be as formal, they'll tell the associates, "Look, I'm being this strict because I want you to succeed. I want you to be successful. So I'm just doing this for your own sake." So, this is then, the life of many new company employees. Salarymen and salarywomen will make the company the center of their life, because that's the agreement. We're not going to fire you. We will always take care of you, but you have to give your life to the company. Okay, and it is brutally intense. We're talking you work super long hours, then you have to go drinking with your colleagues, because when you drink, that's when actually the real business is done. When after work, when you can be kind of, a little more free to say what you want, and then you talk over drinks. And so salarymen, you'll see this at, trains in Japan. At night, the last train, they're usually passed out on, all over the train, just sleeping, and everybody just minds their own business. It's seen as, well, this is happening to everyone. And so the subways actually are trying to stop people from doing this and telling salarymen, please stop drinking and sleeping in our trains like it's your home. They put posters, please don't sleep like that, do it at home. People ignore it and sleep anyway. So if life in a company is so hard, why don't you just quit and go to another company? You can't do that in Japan. Okay, you can't just quit the company and go to a new one, okay? Because then you're seen as a lone wolf or loose cannon. Like, wait a minute. If you're going to be this unloyal to your old company, then you could quit us anytime too. That's what the new company's going to think. And so it's almost impossible to quit. If you do, you're not going to work for another company. You just have to leave the salaryman life. And that's been done. A lot of people have done it. They say, I can't stand it. They quit and they go to a farm and they just, or they run a small restaurant. But, you're giving up that security. So if you work for example, Sony, you can't just quit and work for Panasonic. Panasonic will not hire you. They don't want people who, are, the types that can, betray their company. See that? And so because of that, people have to devote their lives to the companies. For example, managers often are sent to transfer to other parts of the country or even the world. And the family, they say, well, our son or daughter's in school. You can't just pull them out and move them out. So what will often happen is The manager would transfer and live separate from the family. But there's also some good things about being part of the company, which is the company will often provide company dorms for new employees to live. And when you live in these dorms, it's super cheap and affordable. And they get to also bond with other new employees and make friends with them and learn the company culture that way. In part 3, we're going to look at women workers and young workers in this new Japanese economy. And this is actually from a drama. It's called Haken no Hinkaku, or Dignity of a Temp Worker, which is about a super temp who is better than actually the regular workers. If we're going to talk about women workers, we need to have some historical perspective. Realize that women have always worked in Japan, either in the farms or in the cities. Okay, most women throughout most of Japanese history have worked. In fact, the Meiji modernization was built on young women who worked in silk factories. And by the 1920s, young women were working in fields like nursing. They were department store, clerks, bus conductors. So, women were, in the workforce even in the 1920s. However, in the 1920s, and especially in post-war Japan, the media promoted a middle-class ideal, which was the housewife. Okay, this was, the ideal that women were told to aspire for. The man was supposed to work in office, and the woman would stay home and be a stay-at-home housewife. This became, the media ideal. It wasn't reality for most women, but it became the ideal that they aspired to. And, a key point I want to point out is even today, the housewife is a respected and glamorous profession in Japan. Okay, it means that one's middle class. It means you're rich, that you can stay home and take care of the house while your husband works. That you don't have to work. So it's actually a very middle class ideal. But one key point to also remember is that the housewife is not weak. Okay, the housewife actually is in control of the home. For example, many men come back from the salaryman jobs, just tired, and passed out from working so hard. They'll give the money to the wife, and the wife takes care of the finances. That's right, the wife takes care of all the finances, and she'll give some spending money to the husband. So for companies, this means you aim at women. Car commercials are aimed at women. Stock and credit card commercials are aimed at women. The appliances are all aimed at women because they are the ones who make the purchasing decisions. So tourism, for example, Hawaii tourism, they aim at women because women decide where the family's going to go for vacation. So in a way, Japan, from a consumer viewpoint, is a hidden matriarchy.
It's still a man's world in Japan, but this reflects really the separation of gendered spheres of work. In other words, men are expected to dominate certain spheres of work, and women will dominate other spheres. And they're not supposed to overlap that much, although they are overlapping and women are entering the men's world. For example, in politics, men still dominate. Okay, politics is really much a man's world. Um, you know, only very few of the cabinet members are women. And we look at women in national parliaments. Well, in 2013, Japan fell to 124 from rank 113. That's right. It was like the number 124 in the world in women in politics. Okay, by comparison, China's ranking was number 54 in the world of women in politics. Saudi Arabia, believe it or not, 69. And South Korea was number 88. So women really are extremely underrepresented in politics. So in some ways, if you look at uh, Japan, women just have not really cracked the barrier into this men's world. And by Western standards, women are underrepresented in management and pay. There are like huge social pressures for women to take care of the kids and their parents, the elderly. So women have to do all this work. And so, for many women, jobs, for example, like the management jobs or just regular office jobs, they have long hours and Japan, has a lack of childcare, lack of elderly facilities. And so since women have to, take care of kids and the elderly, the lack of these facilities and the long hours of work mean that women usually are deterred from entering senior roles or middle management. And so there has been change recently, and women are 15%, that's 15% of department managers, and yet they're really absent in the middle or top management. Once, they get pregnant or they marry, they have a family, they're kind of told, kind of pressured, or they choose to leave the company because of lack of childcare and long hours. You can't really be a mother in this kind of situation. Many young women instead become office ladies. They do the clerical work, and they're there to really be bright and cheerful and to kind of brighten up the office. And many young women, out of college or out of high school, they take up haken, which is contract work, and they do that kind of work. And then when they're no longer needed, their contracts are not renewed. And so because of then the lack of women in really middle management or upper management, female workers' salaries are about 70% of men. However, for the first time, the average salary of young women ages like 18 to 30 is actually higher than the average salary of young men 18 to 30. That's right. Young women then on average make more than young men. So showing then at least at the lower levels, women are now, making it in the men's field of industry and business. Keep in mind, in terms of consumers, Japan is a hidden matriarchy. That's where women are in charge. In other words, advertisers and companies aim at women, not men, because women do most of the consuming. Women do most of the purchasing in Japan. This is a result of the gender separations and middle class ideals in Japan. Okay, there's a gendered middle class ideals in society. Men work, and middle class women stay at home and take care of the kids. This ideals are so strong that there's heavy pressure on women in big companies to quit if they get pregnant. And, women are kind of pressured to become full-time housewives. Or many women in business decide to become full-time housewives because a stay-at-home housewife is a very prestigious role in Japan. It's, not something people, I'm just a housewife. I am a housewife. People are proud to say that. Okay. Now, in reality, many working class mothers work outside the home for income, such as factories or service sectors. Or, many women, once the kids are old enough to go to school, they do go back to the workforce. So there is a change going on in Japan slowly, and many women are trying to balance work and a family, because, not all women do want to be housewives. But I'm just saying the pressure to become a full-time middle-class housewife is strong, although for working women, many have to keep working. So what happened is the middle-class housewife then becomes a household manager, and she takes care of the major consumer purchases in major household items. The guy is too busy. He goes to work, and the husband comes home tired and just gives the money to the wife, the wife and mother, and she then takes care of the household finances, and she decides what car to buy, what refrigerator, where to go on vacations. In other words, the woman is really in charge of most consumer purchases. And so because of that, advertisers aim at women. So that's kind of like, very different from America, where a lot of it's aimed at men. In Japan, it's aimed at women. Like take cars, for example. Women do a lot of the purchases for cars. They're either, single women, they want to buy cars, or they're now, household managers, in other words, housewives, and they buy the cars for their family. And so you have a lot of car companies making cars aimed at women with, women advertisers, spokespeople. You can see that. So it's, a lot of the car market is aimed at the female consumer. in America, a lot of it is aimed at men. All the car ads, alcohol ads. If you look at, just watch American commercials. Just notice how much it's aimed at men. You see that? And so you're just seeing already a big difference in societies. And look at the power of young single women. Okay, many of them are shut out of the career track. They know they're not going to move up in the company. So they don't really need then like to, go super overtime. You see that? No need to really save. They're just, office ladies. A lot of them are. And so, they really spend a lot. They do a lot of the consumer trends, a lot of the consumer spending. And so many, young women, like, in their late teens or early 20s, they just go shopping, they go on vacations, and so they're heavily targeted by advertisers. And so a lot of mundane products, like instant noodles, for example, can be aimed at women. See that? Mundane products are just, you watch Japanese TV, you just hear so many female voices and no hard sell. It's very gendered. So you have to keep that in mind when dealing with the Japanese consumer, that women actually wanted to prime consumers that need to be aimed at. For example, take this case study of Hanauta instant noodles. Okay, many marketers, they surveyed Japanese women and they found out that they want foods that are not high in calories because they're worried about the figures. And so when coming up with a instant noodles aimed at women, what they did was they made it small. You don't have to have it huge, so it's low calorie. And then they put in flavors like here, the one in the red, that's rose hips. So it's supposed to, be, good for your body. And the other one is chamomile. Yeah, you see that rose hip and chamomile infused instant noodles. And then it's given a, very attractive packaging so that it doesn't just look, very masculine. It's aimed at women, trying to encourage women to eat noodles. Now, you'd never see this in America, instant noodles aimed at women or, because just women are not really seen as the prime consumers. But in Japan, this is the segment that consumes. And there are new opportunities for women with the breakdown of the old economic system and the rise of one that looks more at someone's merit and skills rather than being promoted by seniority. With the graying population, Japan is one of the oldest populations in the world, there's less young people. So that means then qualified women can find, much more entry-level jobs than in the past. And also, women do dominate fields like fashions, arts, journalism, media, or bar hostessing. So that's where a lot of them can find work there as well. But a huge development has been the use of temp workers, known as haken. Okay, haken is temp workers. Companies can hire someone to a 1-year contract, and after the contract is over, get rid of them. That way they don't have to worry about lifetime employment. This kind of work, then a lot of women take it up. So on one hand, it can look bad. A lot of these women don't have lifetime permanent jobs. On the other hand, there's a huge demand for people to take these jobs. And so I found out actually from some of my Japanese female students that some temp workers are actually paid more than regular employees because temp workers don't have all of these fringe benefits. And to keep them, from just quitting after 1 year, they're often given actually higher salaries than regular employees. And then they're told, like one woman told me, she was told not to tell any regular employees her salary. The regular employees would freak out if they found out how much she was paid. And so many women also join fields that men avoid, such as, healthcare or working in nursing homes. And so there's a huge demand for women in these services. And so they actually can find employment there as well.
In today's Japan, there are diversity of jobs for urban women. One of the more common jobs for urban educated women is to be an OL, which means office lady. Okay, and these are young women who are hired to add a young and feminine touch to the office and to make it a pleasant environment to work in. Usually they're hired, after they go to junior college. Okay, a few go to college, but usually it's junior college graduates. And what they do is they do the light clerical work in the office, which tends to be dominated by men. So they're added there to make the office kind of bright and cheery. Now, these young women, they know they're not going to get promoted. because, they're office ladies. And so they usually, when 5 o'clock comes, they take off while, all the other salary men and a few salary women are still stuck in the office. The office ladies will just go off and hang out with their friends, go shopping or do whatever. Now, these young OLs usually live with their parents rent-free, and they're getting a salary, so it means they have a lot of money to spend. Okay, so no, this demographic is shrinking since there are less and less young people, and there's actually a decreasing number of OLs. But there's still a valuable demographic that businesses aim at, because they're the ones who will buy designer clothes. They're the ones who will buy they'll go abroad on shopping, tourism excursions. Now these OLs, once they're married, usually, they're married, within the company. They're kind of like, quietly, suddenly pushed out of the job, usually by 30. They said, you're married, so it's time for you to now to start, staying home and becoming a housewife. So, for many, young Japanese women, the path they aspire to is to go to college, then be an OL, they get married, and then be a middle-class housewife. Now, most of Japan's business is still male-dominated. Okay, a lot of it, still a lot of men there. However, one has to realize that in certain spheres of work, women actually dominate certain, jobs. And some of these jobs are actually quite surprising. Okay, now one of the jobs that women dominate is called the mizu shobai jobs, or the water trade jobs. In other words, bars. Okay, so many young women, often many of them who have they didn't go to college, they'll work as hostesses. Okay, and all they do is these hostesses and this work is sit there, and men will pay money, expensive drinks to go and talk to them. And they make the men feel loose and comfortable, and then once the men feel comfortable enough, then they can start talking to their business clients about the job work. You see that? So their job, in a way, is kind of start the conversation and keep it going with between the businessmen. And for many of these women, they allow them save up their money, and they actually buy and run their own bars. So the mizu shobai bar business trade actually is heavily dominated by women, and some of the hostesses actually have become celebrities because they're seen as having good style, and it's not necessarily prestige work. It's kind of actually has a little bit of kind of shady undertone, but it's a way up for many women who lack education, or they lack connections, or they're not from rich families. But believe it or not, fields like cosmetics, fashions, and television news are dominated by women, actually. There are many opportunities for women to rise within these fields. In fact, there are more female anchors, in the newscasters, anchors in Japan than in mainstream U.S. news, like NBC, CBS, ABC. In Japan, actually, women, newscasters are very common. So you can see that, think of it as gendered spheres of work. Okay, men dominate most job areas, but in some other areas, women do dominate. And with economic and political reform, we now see more women managers within companies, because companies just want to find the best talent, and so they're more willing now to look at women. And so once a rarity, we now see women in positions of corporate responsibility. Okay, women are now increasingly filling the managerial ranks, and in fact in politics some women also are rising up as well in power. And so we're seeing in a way the new economy, the new Japan, has more opportunities for educated women. So now many women also, in order to get good jobs, they will go overseas to learn English. If you look at all the classes of Japanese who come to America to learn English, it's really dominated by women. Okay, they'll go overseas, learn English, then they'll go back to Japan and work for multinational companies, like non-Japanese companies. They'll work for multinational companies, work their secretaries, executive secretaries as managers, using their English skills. But I don't want to over-glamorize the situation. Many women have borne the brunt of the new economy as well. For example, many of them, even with a college degree, have become temp workers, okay, with little job security or few benefits. And so, you're also seeing a gap then in women as well. Some have risen up while others have, just become mere temp workers who could be fired when their contract is over. Women have also adjusted to this new world, okay, and there's been a quiet revolution in women's roles. For example, many, women with jobs, good, jobs in the companies have put off marriage. Okay, they live on a good salary in an apartment, or they live with their parents. Okay, and so many say, why should I marry? I'm making a good salary. If I marry, I have to quit my job. And if we have kids, it's hard to get childcare. I have to take care of them. So, why marry? I'm happy the way I am now. And so in Japan, actually, the average age of marriage is 30. 30. You see that? And in fact, in the U.S., the average age of marriage is around 20. That's if people marry. Many people, just decide, no, let's just have kids and not marry. And so in Japan, then, we're seeing women are putting off marriage, having fewer kids. That's why Japan's population is shrinking. Because, to these women, having, kids will mean they have to end their lifestyle. And, government does not have childcare. There's very few facilities out there, so they don't have to give up that lifestyle. So, in fact, 1 in every 4 women in their 30s are unmarried. Okay, and there's a term that's been coined for them called make inu, or loser dog. The winner dog's supposed to be like, the middle class housewife with kids and the salaryman husband, and living the good life. So these women are seen as the quote unquote, loser dogs. They're unmarried, they're in their 30s, but many of them said, so what? I don't care. I'm proud. I got a job. I'm living good life. I'm happy. Don't tell me what to do. And so in a way, this is, many women are striking back against the traditional gender norms. Now, with a graying population, okay, this is for businesses to know. We're seeing many companies are now hiring middle-aged women models and actresses, or they're making TV shows aimed at women in their 30s and 40s. Okay, for example, this is a drama series called Around 40. It's about women who are now, turning 40 and still single, or they still want to be glamorous. And so, just letting you know, Japan is graying. And so there is now a big market for middle-aged women models and actresses. Young people, however, are bearing the brunt of Japan's new economy. Many youth are stuck in lower-paying jobs with little security and long hours. So remember now, the big companies are not hiring as much new graduates as they used to. So young people find themselves competing for an ever-shrinking, pool of new salaryman jobs. So many, Japanese, young ones, after, high school or even college, they become freeters. Okay, that's a Japanese term, freeters. That's a term to refer to young adults who move between low-paying jobs. Many of these are part-time jobs, or jobs that don't require much skill, and that you quit it and you just go to another job. And so we now know that 1/3 of Japan's workforce is part-time, and a lot of it is made up actually of young people. Okay, because they can't really find good company jobs. Many young Japanese have actually decided to give up, saying, I'm not going to find any good job. Why even try? And so they're known as NEET. Okay, NEET is a British term. It means not in education, employment, or training. Not in education, employment, or training. These, you could call them, in the American term, slackers. They're no longer seeking jobs. They're not, seeking education or new skills. Many of them, stay at home, and, the parents that support them. They've pretty much given up. Okay, we think there are about 600,000 to 800,000 NEETs in Japan, that they've pretty much given up any hope of finding a good job. And in extreme cases, we see what is called hikikomori. Okay, hikikomori are shut-ins. Okay, these are, people who just, there's so much stress trying to adapt to life that they decide to shut themselves in the rooms and they don't come out. Okay, or they come out maybe just to, eat, or, or just maybe like walk around at night. And, the parents are too ashamed to tell people their, kids have become hikikomori, so their parents just bring food to the room, open the door, take the food, eat it inside the room, and take it out, and they'll spend all day in the room just on the computer, just in chat rooms, or just going online. We think that there are maybe 1 million hikikomori in Japan, and this has become a huge societal problem. Well, thank you very much for listening. Send me email if you have any questions. And I'm just letting you know that, if you go to, Japan today, in a place like Tokyo, although you see homeless, you're still going to see, a hum and bustle of activity. Okay, don't think the Japanese are running around all crying, oh, how bad everything is going. They're still going on with their lives, and it's remarkably still low crime, still a very orderly society. But they know there's a problem, and people are now talking what to do about it. If you have any questions, just email me. See you later, and goodbye.